In 2020, pharmaceutical manufacturing is at the crossroads. It is essential to saving our world. In this context, the question, what is the current status of quality by design and PAT implementation, is a very important question. The combined collective efforts of our community has advanced quality by design and process analytical technology significantly to be at a tipping point. Will it serve the purpose it needs to serve is, I think, up to us. I serve as an advisor to DeAnd Pharma. Therefore, I just want to make sure I disclose that. But I do want to emphasize, with the funding from FDA at University of Connecticut, um, um, continuous manufacturing of liposomes, nanoparticles, has advanced significantly to reach a commercial stage. Um, Process analytical technology is a key component to providing high assurance of quality and high consistency in particle size, droplet size, even at the nanoparticle stage. I'm also an advisor to Continuous Pharmaceuticals. This is a end-to-end manufacturing system where API is manufactured in situ to produce products without human intervention. And it's a contained unit with controls throughout the systems based on PAT. And it has gone from an academic setting at MIT to a 50,000 square feet GMP end-to-end manufacturing system with funding from Department of Defense and Department of Health and Human Services. And it is now collaborating with hospital systems in the US to establish a system for making high quality, low cost drugs in the US. The PAT and the 21st Century Initiative efforts initiated at the beginning of the 21st century have now matured to bring forward a continuous manufacturing platform recognized under the 21st Century Cures Act, and FDA has remained the strongest champion enabler of continuous pharmaceutical manufacturing, with funding to academia to develop the technologies and providing an emerging technology program to help industry implement innovative manufacturing technologies. And so far, several new drug applications have been approved. In January 2021, FDA established a new collaboration with the National Institute of Standards and Technology to accelerate the adoption of advanced manufacturing technologies to strengthen public health infrastructure. The Memorandum of Understanding is intended to increase U.S. medical supply chain resilience and advance domestic manufacturing of drugs, biological products, and medical devices through adoption of 21st century manufacturing technologies. These include smart technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning and emerging manufacturing processes. This MOU signals alignment between senior leadership at both institutions in recognition of the importance of modernizing regulatory framework as well as industry practices to meet public health needs in the US. In February of 2019, FDA issued a draft guideline on quality considerations for continuous manufacturing. Within it, process analytical technology provides the key technological basis for continuous manufacturing. The guideline covers quality considerations in the context of key concepts of continuous manufacturing, control strategy, process validation. It brings together aspects which are also relevant for scale-up and stability and bridging studies and the filing considerations. In November of 2018, the ICH approved a concept paper, ICH Q13, Continuous Manufacturing of Drug Substances, Drug Products. It will take perhaps it will take about 3+ years for that to be finalized. This guideline seeks to harmonize continuous manufacturing related definitions and regulatory concepts across the regions. It's supposed to hone in on key scientific approaches for continuous manufacturing and the related regulatory expectations. Industry has raised questions in terms of how will this align with FDA's draft guidance, and there are certain technical questions that I think remain, and there is a concern that the FDA draft guidance is merging GMP and CMC review aspects. I think that is necessary as we go forward, and I think I'll talk to that point a bit more as we go along. There are several technical issues, open issues, and questions around, but let me focus on two aspects in this talk. Going towards continuous manufacturing with PAT requires us to have a comprehensive quality by design approach to ensure that we understand the processes and process dynamics. And we must do so as a function of the attributes of the input materials and process conditions, equipment design elements, and the ability to enable material traceability and establish a sound risk assessment of the continuous manufacturing process. Now, one of the key aspects which makes continuous manufacturing so attractive is we can do very quick design of experiments, not necessarily starting from scratch all over again as in a batch process. And at the same time, I think the steady state aspect provides a basis for very efficient development. One of the key aspects is residence time distribution within each unit of the material. Traceability and batch rejections or rejection of certain materials which are non-conforming remains a question, and but solutions are available through residence time distribution models to address those. At the same time, I think one of the struggles is the redundancy, and to what extent do we need to have dual assessment system, and to what extent we need to have redundant systems is a topic of interest that needs to be resolved over time. My emphasis also is on the legacy challenges, which are often discounted until we feel the pain. Some of these legacy also have an opportunity to directly link quality to clinical without going through surrogate test methods such as in vitro dissolution and so forth. And I think there is an opportunity here that will evolve, and I expect in the next decade the landscape of clinical to quality linkages, association, and criticality would be assessed more directly. One of the legacy pain point really is, I think, aspects related to material variability of the materials in input materials, but also I think how we set specifications, especially compendial specifications such as dissolution profile, and how do we, for example, I think changing regulatory specification for dissolution after one has established real-time release considerations and so forth creates a lot of challenges and so forth. So this aspect still really needs to be addressed. Also, I think what we have to address really is the notion of SUPAC, in the sense going from batch to continuous. What are the criteria for comparability or equivalence assessment? Do we need bioequivalence studies and so forth? Those questions remain, and so I think we cannot ignore those, and we need to start addressing those. At the political level, we have a new executive order on America's supply chain on February of 24, 2021, President Biden signed an executive order to address U.S. supply chain vulnerabilities exposed by the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent national shortages. I think this will provide additional support for pharmaceutical manufacturing in the U.S., and this will also create another driving force for moving towards continuous manufacturing. The next decade in pharmaceutical manufacturing really demands on us to take a systems of systems orientation, where we have to focus on the larger brand companies going towards continuous manufacturing and the smaller companies remaining in the traditional manufacturing mode, and the nuances and the challenges that will create having a higher assurance of quality versus a traditional system prone to the traditional GMP human error type of consideration challenges. So in that sense, I think we need to bring a objective means of a quality index as we advance manufacturing, but also I think address new prior knowledge challenges that we have discussed in the paper I had shared in my previous talk. But my focus really has turned to is professional development and people development, because the education and training needed for working with continuous manufacturing is a dominant of engineering skill sets. And for example, I think we don't have the critical mass at the moment. Our critical mass for continuous manufacturing is very localized in certain universities and so forth. Given the large scope of the challenge, given that 90 to 97% of all prescriptions filled in America are generic drugs, not brand drugs, I think the challenge is very significant. And so the supply of affordable medicines was on a critical path for decades. This critical path has become more tortuous now. Challenge at hand is complex, akin to redesigning systems. And let's not discount legacy challenges that will haunt us if we don't pay attention to them and wait for them to pinch us as we go along. The key message I want to emphasize is let us not underestimate complexity. We have done so before, and let's not repeat the same mistake. So there are important lessons in the trials and tribulations of the 20 years of effort gone into the PAT and 21st century initiatives. Let's learn from that. And I want to share some thoughts on that aspect as a reminder of that we cannot afford to underestimate the complexity of the challenge at hand, and we have to develop ourselves to match the complexity of the challenge at hand. So let me put this in context. The status of PAT and QbD implementation in 2010, which was almost 6 years after the 21st century initiative, was minuscule. So I think FDA had requested McKinsey company to come and do an assessment, and that report is available. But the key challenge there was implementation was almost nil in generics and biologics, and some efforts in the new drugs. The challenge there also was that the regulators were not ready, and to QbD or not QbD became a question for a number of companies. And generics are all about file first and figure it out later. So I think the business model for generic is likely to change dramatically. And I think you're already seeing that with Civica RX, which is a not-for-profit organization, and now continuous manufacturing. So how the future of generic industry is likely to dramatically change, at least in the US, and it will have significant impact on the sector in India particularly. And in India, for example, the gap between academia to industry, I think, is very significant. IIT Delhi and a few other places are really advanced in PAT, engineering, pharmaceutical engineering and PAT, but most of the pharmacy schools are ill prepared, will need either a dramatic shift in the curriculum or
or we have to think about different professions for B.Pharm degrees in India, given that many of those jobs in pharmaceutical manufacturing may not be available to the traditional talent that we develop. To emphasize and to remind that we have a tendency to underestimate the complexity of challenge at hand. And for that, let me present to you the FDA's effort to bring back pharmaceutical quality for the 21st century 2.0. And in 2015, FDA reorganized itself and stood up a new office to replace Office of Pharmaceutical Science with Office of Pharmaceutical Quality to achieve one quality voice across the oversight responsibilities. And in that report, FDA noted that product recalls and defects were unacceptably high and attributed to inherent defects in product and process design. Alarming shortages of critical drugs, the number of post-approval supplements increased, and the tendency of FDA to lock in an applicant's manufacturing process continued. And therefore, I think and inspections were not well connected to knowledge gained from product review, and FDA had only limited information about current state of pharmaceutical quality, which I think they have put efforts to change that dramatically, and things are improving now. But that was the state in 2015. And given that it reflects our tendency to underestimate complexity, I also wish to take the opportunity of this presentation to share with you my thought process and how I deal with uncertainty. So given that status of QbD and PAT implementation in 2015 was uncertain, what type of uncertainty was it? Was it aleatoric or epistemic? Aleatoric is inability to assess probability of occurrence, or epistemic is knowledge uncertainty. So we use the example of elephant in the dark. We know what an elephant looks like. So the challenge, the complex and the difficult challenge in front of us is to carry that elephant on a tightrope, struggling with profiteers nipping at our elephant. How does the elephant appear in our organization? So let's describe it. So elephant is part of the development and as part of our policies and procedures. So product, method, process development policy. What is that policy? And how does it define when do we do bio batch, exhibit batch? What do we do for pre-validation and validation, and what we do to commercialization? So depending on, we have policies and procedures for stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 aspects of process development. I've taken that notion from the FDA process validation guideline 2011. So that is really our elephant, and we are dealing, each one of us deal with different parts of the elephant, dealing with different policies and procedures to guide our day-to-day operations, and we have to collectively see the elephant together to be able to bring an integrative approach to quality by design. In uncertainty, without the benefit of empirical data, we must observe patterns, trends. So how we make sense and know what we know to be true in virtue of the meaning we make requires discipline. The discipline comes in the form of epistemology. You ask yourself, how do I know what I know, to reconfirm or verify? Or proactively you ask how I can know what I need to know to do your thought experiment. And you appreciate system, simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic, depending on cause and effect relationships and predictability. Simple cause and effect relationships are self-evident for everybody. Complicated cause and effect relationships are multivariate, requiring certain degree of education and training. Complex, unknown until you do research to decipher those relationships. And chaotic, which means is The system is unpredictable due to extreme sensitivity to initial conditions, and patterns emerge in chaotic systems around strange attractors. And you expand your awareness and don't be a procrastinator. If you put everything in one size fits all, you are a procrastinator. Cause and effect unknown is not an acceptable answer, so you keep your thought experiments going and you're expanding your awareness, your search, so that you actually decipher the cause and effect relationships within the patterns that you see, and you verify those, and give yourself room to do all of this, room to think. So here's a notion of feeling space, knowledge space, and design space that we can use to connect to what we often do. In 2015, from the report on One Quality Voice, we know that FDA had only limited information about the current state of pharmaceutical quality. So what questions should we ask? How sure do we want to be in the answers we seek? And what assumptions are we willing to tolerate? This sort of sets us up to saying, what reasons for gap did FDA express in 2015? What FDA doing to mind the gaps now? Based on that, we can benchmark current state, particularly in our context, our corporate context, and so that we can inform our stance and our strategy within our corporation to be at par or ahead of the competition. And the assumption we start with, what FDA says it does, it's trustworthy. That's a reasonable assumption too, but we have to verify our assumptions as we go along. In the One Quality Voice report, FDA noted that since 2004, we have witnessed significant progress towards this vision. However, at the same time, CDER's mission has been confronted with new and increasingly complex challenges, such as unprecedented drug shortages and recalls, which in part reflect failures in pharmaceutical quality. Fair enough. But what reason or what evidence does FDA cite? Citation 2 in that case. See, for example, guidance for industry PAT guidance, ICHQ 8, ICHQ 10, ICHQ 11. So guidances is the evidence of significant progress. Is that so? Quality policy on the wall, but not in practice. I see that often in many companies that I visit, especially after a warning letter has been issued. So having a guideline published is step one. Unless we implement that guideline, I don't see that as a progress. So, and since FDA in 2004 and 5 decided not to scale up the PAT team, the PAT team members essentially left. And 2010, Chris Watts left. I left earlier. And at the occasion to come back to FDA's conference in 2010, I had to remind them that I see FDA has distinguished PAT as a tool and QbD as something separate. That was never the intent. And therefore, I believe FDA approached it from a reductionist perspective, didn't take a systems approach, and therefore PAT, instead of a system as it was defined in the PAT guidance, became a tool, and QbD was a sort of a sequence of procedures. We needed to take a systems approach, and we did not, was my assessment. In taking a reductionist approach, Some fundamental aspects were also not appreciated at FDA. One of my criticism was how we set specifications, especially we set specification after the clinical trials are done, and we set specifications, new specifications at the end of the development and review process, and the companies have no choice but to accept it. But in quality by design, you set your quality target product profile first so that you essentially have specification, you design towards that specification. Tightening the specification after the fact, after clinical studies have been done and so forth, amounts to that you are forcing a specifications for which the company did not design that. Although companies may accept that specification because they need an approval, but there is an inherent disconnect here. I call it "ini, mini, miny, mo," and a Properian trap and a Procrustean standard because of that. And remember, I think the US and Europe, the pharmacopoeial linkage to regulatories is very different. Europe does not have product monographs, and US does, and this has very significant implications. And before we were able to open the door for ICH Q8, US FDA was opposing the progress on ICH Q8. So the PAT guidance was written to be a all-encompassing in the event that ICH Q8 would not happen. So it was with quality by design was built into the PAT guidance, and it was hand in hand. At the April 2002 meeting of the FDA Science Board, Dr. Woodcock laid out the challenge that we confront that holds back adoption of PAT. Industry concern about regulatory implication of results. Closer scrutiny will reveal variation in existing product missed by sampling. And PAT guidance addressed that, and delay approval was the whole idea of reducing regulatory uncertainty in the PAT guidance. And that went hand in hand with the team. So without the team, there was no PAT in a sense. And the other aspect really is that the compendial standards with built-in zero tolerance are market standards. When tested, one has to conform to that. But when you impose that standard as a QC test for batch-to-batch testing, you have an inherent problem that with type 2 errors, about in this particular example, about 4% of batches would fail, although there was no different than passing. So that is a common cause, and we keep chasing our common cause. Remember, each product has several such specifications, not just one. By design, the compendial or market standards are intended for market and apply only to the samples tested. And that aspect is laid out, or at least was laid out in the USP with a clear statement that compendial standards take on the character of statistical procedures with multiple units involved and perhaps a sequential procedure designed to allow the user to determine that the tested article meets or does not meet the standard. The similarity to the statistical procedure may seem to suggest an intent to make inference to some larger group of units as a batch, but in all cases, statements about whether the compendial standards is met apply only to the unit tested. And this aspect is so ingrained, it's so habitual that we don't question this assumption. That's the way we have done this, that's the way we keep doing it. And I think with Industry 4.0 or Pharma 4.0, where we are going the next decade, we have an opportunity now, or we have a need now to refine that, reposition this with the NIST standard, NIST collaboration, and with USP itself taking a leadership position in continuous manufacturing with Atul, who spoke earlier. I think we have an opportunity to resolve this dilemma now. So what sense do I make, or what meaning do I make? As I noted earlier, I believe that FDA underestimated the complexity. It took a reductionist approach, separated PAT and QbD, and in their underestimation of complexity, projected that by 2013, the entire QbD will be implemented for generic drugs. Obviously, that was not the case, so that FDA had to bring back one quality voice in effort in 2015. Clearly, the efforts FDA is now taking are commendable, and I think their vision to the future of pharmaceutical quality, Six Sigma, not the methodology, the 3.4 defects per million opportunities in the right direction. And one, to do that, you have to move to performance-based regulation, not the management-based regulation. Those are all in the right direction. But to do that, let's not underestimate the complexity. Let's look at the legacy challenges of interpretation of the compendia and the real-time release and the controls, testing versus control, and this becomes fundamental and it's critical. To assess truly the current state of PAT and QBD, the current state of quality, um, I believe it'll be useful for FDA to revisit the white paper the PAT team and the Manufacturing Science Working Group issued in 2004, Innovation and Continuous Improvement in Pharmaceutical Manufacturing. And unfortunately, that has been archived away. It's no longer available. But if you go to my paper on new prior knowledge, you will find a link to that paper. So that's available. And I would recommend that with all the progress FDA is making, with all the efforts it's expending, it will help to progress faster and with less pain if we take the lessons that the PAT team had learned along with the Manufacturing Science Working Group, so that we don't feel the pain again. To help you see the big picture, the generic market was in chaos, or perhaps still is, in August 2017, according to Bloomberg. Generic pill color changes may affect medication adherence. Pharmaceuticals, by definition, are better than placebo in clinical trials and in the real world. And we have inherited the legacy of a pharmaceutical equivalence criteria, which we had no choice. It was set before the science evolved. And therefore, I think to be true to our do no harm and to satisfy the needs of the patients with different colors and shapes of tablets, I think we owe it to them to reduce our errors. Yes, I think we want to improve generic competition, but generic competition without manufacturing reliability is not a solution. Continuous manufacturing truly is part of the solution, but given the volume, given the know-how expertise needed, that will remain a part of the solutions, transforming slowly the sector. In the meanwhile, we have to maintain both systems. Yes, fed up with drug companies, hospitals decide to start their own. The model is changing. And I think chasing our common cause variability, root cause unknown, is a contributing factor to the frustration that leads to breaches in assurance of data integrity. We need new prior knowledge to provide assurance of therapeutic equivalence in the 21st century. And generic drug market in chaos is reflected in the multiple review cycles, um, a large fraction of approved ANDAs not manufactured or not coming to market, and so forth and so forth. So this is elaborated in our paper, Pharmaceutical New Prior Knowledge, 21st Century Assurance of Therapeutic Equivalence. And I would be thrilled if you read that and share your thoughts with me. The journey ahead is from chaos to continual improvement, and that is also the path to harmonization. Science is necessary but not sufficient. Engineering is necessary but not sufficient. What we need is pharmaceutical engineering science. That was the key message in my 2019 report to the CPHI, Chaos to Continual Improvement, and we elaborated further on that in a recent publication on pharmaceutical quality, team science, and education. And I believe I think we have made significant progress on the engineering, pharmaceutical engineering aspect of continuous manufacturing. What is needs to catch up is material science and pharmaceutical sciences of comparability and equivalence assessment without having to resort to clinical studies, without and providing a basis for a new soup act, which is more mechanistic based for going from batch to continuous manufacturing. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you. I leave you with what I started. Left is not wrong when the right is right. Internal validation, built-in peer review, quality control and assurance mechanism within us, our frontal lobe, two hemispheres, and a network within. Let us use it to empower our own self-development. We have two hemispheres, so our brain can produce two different views of reality. Let's learn to recognize the dissonance that points us to those two different views and reconcile those. You can change your brain just by thinking differently. Knowledge is power, but knowledge about yourself is self-empowerment. The moment we accept that the internal world has an effect on the external world, we have to begin to use our frontal lobe. Take time to reflect and to respond with thought. Thank you.